Hey everybody, this is Richie from the Metal Cell podcast. I want to give a shout out first of all to our main sponsors, Rising Suns, the award-winning brewery in Cork. Be sure to call into there if you fancy some nice tipples. If you're a tourist around the Cork area, I'm sure they'll look after you there. I'm delighted to welcome back to the show Nathanael from DAMIM. How are you, Nathanael?
Hi there, Richie. How are you doing?
Good to
And
see you again, my friend.
thank you very much for having me or us collectively, I suppose, me and the band I
You're
represent
repping the lads.
again on the show.
Yeah,
Really,
shout out to Flo, Nick, and Faust. Hope they're all keeping well there.
to the best of my knowledge, yeah, they're pretty good. Yeah, thank
When
you.
was the last time you saw them, actually, as a collective?
Great question. Well, we had a rehearsal about 10 days ago. I have regular updates with Flow, especially as we press ahead with the comic. So
Okay.
we'll have sort of status meetings, but those tend to be on Zoom. Let's say rehearsal was about 10 days ago or so.
And whereabouts are you all living, Nate? Is it you all London based or some of you further out?
It's mostly London, but Flo lives a bit further towards, say, Northampton, Midlands.
Okay. 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 So and that's a pity, probably for, especially with you, I would imagine that Flo is involved in a lot of the composition.
Yes, but we've never let that hold us back. I'd say he's always been pretty good about traveling, and I drive up to where he practices drums and so on. And we actually also this works in terms of both the composition and the recording. We actually have a semi-permanent setup in his drum room where he can just press record. So instead of having to go into a studio, which well, having to, it's a pleasure when you get to do that and a
Mm,
privilege. But it's also great to have a setup where you can have a good enough capture quality where you can really focus on getting the performance just right.
okay.
Because I would personally take a terrible recording of an incredible performance over the other way around, right?
Oh,
And I think anyone would as well if you hear the results.
yeah. I mean, for example, like living in London brings its own problems and of course it has its positives as well, don't get me wrong. But maybe just for the likes of yourselves as a band, we'll just talk about what's available for rehearsal spaces and studios.
Well, the standard model in London essentially and in the environs is hourly rehearsal spaces.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the model everywhere, unless you're lucky enough to have your own existing space that you can convert into something. And as you will be aware, spaces are massively it's premium in London, so that's incredibly difficult. You can cobble things together where you have a couple of bands that share a private space,
Okay.
right? The closest to that is when I was playing and rehearsing with Akakoka, and there's actually a studio at Dave's parents' place,
Okay.
essentially. But yes, that's how it is.
And what are the rates like?
Oh goodness. Um, I'd say a good rate is depend. It'll depend on the size of the studio. For something like a single person space, if you want to play guitar loud or drums, you might be able to get something like £5 to £8 an hour. For something like a full band, good rate is around 10 £12 an hour.
Okay.
So yeah, but you can get some that go up to 20,
Yeah,
50,
of course.
depending on how much gear you have there as well. For example, John Henry's, I don't know if they still do rehearsal spaces, but that's where the big productions tend to go and rehearse because they'll have a front of house and monitor
Mm,
system that, with full range of drums and back line exactly to spec and whatnot. So,
like through the years, if you're living in London, Nate, is that something that kind of frustrates you, that you have to literally shop around the whole time?
yes, but it's just one of the things that you take as a given. You know,
Mm,
if you want to operate or um, if you want to thrive in this space, you just need to take all this sort of stuff in your stride and work to making it work for you.
yeah.
And it's almost just like, you know, buying food. You have to do that, right?
Yeah. Food for thought there. Let's go back a small bit to when he played Limerick at the Siege. Is the feeling still there? Nice, warm, happy feeling.
Well, yes, of course, it's always a privilege to play and to attend
Mm,
actually any siege event. It's great that it exists and that it serves as a center to quite a buzzing scene, right?
yeah,
One of the nodes of kind of activity, and it's amazing to be uh invited to participate in it. Um, and it was our best siege so far.
yeah.
Hopefully, the next one will be even better.
Mm,
But it was really great being able to see everyone and yeah. The one thing I would say is next time I'll make sure that the flight isn't the one that leaves at 9 a.m. the next day.
So to put this into context, um, ye played in 2023, wasn't it?
Yes.
Was
No,
it May
wait, 22. No, it was 2020. Yeah.
22? My
Yeah.
apologies.
It
22
was the last it
was
was
the
the
last
last
one.
Halloween one.
Correct, yeah. So I'm up at the counter at the bar in 2023
Yeah.
having a beer and looking around as I tend to do. And suddenly at the end of the bar, there's Nathaniel. And I'm just going, wow, that weed is really strong. I need to just calm down and not just get a grip. And I looked again, and sure enough, I was thinking, it definitely is like, but like, how is this possible? Up I went to you, and sure enough, you were there, man. What a brilliant surprise to see you in attendance.
Well, like I said, the event is I it's a great one to attend and be a part of as well as play at. There's always a great atmosphere. There's always great bands worth watching. There's people there to catch up with.
Yeah,
And to be fair, there was another motive for me being there, which was to collect some of the stuff that we'd managed to leave behind at the previous siege.
okay.
But I could have arranged that somehow via mail or
Yeah.
something. It was just a nice excuse to
Mm.
come out and party with the lads.
Yeah, and you certainly did, but at the 9 o'clock flight the next morning. Fucking hell. I didn't realize that.
No, no, that was the time before, and that's one of the reasons why we forgot about, a handful of things at the venue. This time round, I did make sure that I gave myself a bit more time.
Ah, okay. So the last time you were on the podcast was 2019. I checked it there.
Yeah, Monolith Festival.
Monolith.
Yeah.
Yeah, Con Doyle. Shout out to Con. Um, like, unfortunately, and it's becoming a thing now where there's been some fantastic lineups in festivals, both here and in the UK, particularly. The longevity of them doesn't seem to, you're not guaranteed anymore. And for an island like ourselves, the venture that Con started out with the best intentions and having some fantastic bands over 2 or 3 years, suddenly there was a whole issue with COVID and then postponements and, I suppose bands needed deposits on their appearances. Would that be right as well? There's a few
I
things.
mean, I haven't promoted a gig since the early 2000s,
Mm,
right? So I'm at best a poorly experienced novice. I mean, suppose we do pull our weight when we're booked for a gig. We'll take, you know, pitch into the promotion, make sure that everyone who we can make aware of the gig will be aware of it,
mm,
etc., etc. But there's a certain amount of this is where the buck stops. These are the people who are putting up the cash and taking the risk and all that sort of stuff. And there's a certain amount of considerations that need to be taken into account when putting that sort of things together that I'm just not as immediately aware of as they are.
mm-hmm.
So I would caution my, let's say, any kind of armchair analysis on, why is there an epidemic of cancellations, shall we say?
Yeah,
Like,
especially in the UK as well, man. There's been a lot of
well,
bands.
there was so I mean, I'd say Monolith is, to me, it sounded more like Con was, it's a lot of hassle, and his past events have been really successful. And I can't remember whether there was one scheduled for the period which became the lockdown or
Yeah,
not.
there was, yeah.
But but it sounds like he wanted to just get on with his life and not have the kind of the other things that you have to deal with, which is totally fair enough. Like, he did a really excellent job of all the ones. And
Mm.
as an outsider, I reckon he could have, or him and the team, because I think he
It
was,
was a team, yeah, correct. Yeah.
but could have continued, expanded, etc. But that requires certain number of things like extra collateral, and it eats into the time that you can devote to the other parts of your life. Like, I was bitterly disappointed that the UK Death Fest, there was only one edition, which, to be fair to them, they continued to push through COVID until it actually happened. And then they said, okay, well, this is the only one that's ever going to happen.
Yeah.
Can you imagine trying to organize a sort of 3,500 festival, attendance festival, like in Baltimore, from here, or from this side of the Atlantic,
Yeah.
with some pretty major bands from all over the world,
Mm.
right? And it's not a sort of really significant money making enterprise. Sure, I'm sure they made money, but I don't think that's the real root of the motivation here. It's genuinely a labor of love, I think, that happens to make them some money, but I don't think they're going to, buy a horde of Ferraris, a fleet of Ferraris from it, sort of thing, right?
No.
So can you, like, but they weren't just organizing one, they were organizing Netherlands one, Quebec, California, etc. So now they're saying, well, we're just going to do the what's it, the original one, which is fair enough. And so I think that's the case for a few promoters, which is, we're just going to stop doing it because it's a lot of hassle and a lot of risk, that while we're not in the ditch right now, we're not sure we can afford it with the increases in costs, etc., etc. And I suspect, again, my perspective is limited, but I would suspect that things like insurers have increased their premiums as a
Oh,
result,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So if you have this sort of convergence of circumstances that are basically undermining that type of enterprise, and there are some which have tried to push through, like Manifest. We played, I think it was Manifest North, which was
Mm.
basically a smaller version of that
Yeah.
festival, last year, which was It was a good thing to be a part of. I wish we'd done the Saturday, but we couldn't. Um, but there's the one that happened this year, and I don't know the specifics of it, but if you look at all the gigs, not festivals, but all the gigs that we've been booked for, most of the ticket sales happened within 2 weeks of the events of the pre-sales. So
Yeah.
you've got a sort of flat line where hardly anyone buys tickets, and then when people think, yes, I know what I'm doing, I've been paid this month and I want to go to this show, you get this surge of tickets, and you
Yeah.
get a venue that's at least 2/3 full or half full, or just enough to break even for the promoter and the bands, right? But that sort of attitude is really pervasive because people have been burnt. Specifically, I was actually watching that video about the Metal Days debacle. I don't know if you've watched
No.
it, but it's an interesting viewpoint. I don't know the ins and outs of all the facts, but the long and the short of it is that a lot of people bought tickets and didn't have, and I don't mean specifically Metal Days. I mean, even if it's flight tickets, plane tickets with Ryanair, Michael O'Leary, if you're hearing this. But yeah, there's people got their fingers burnt, and don't want to invest in something if it's not a dead cert. And I suspect that's what happened with Manifest, because they pulled out a month before.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the other festival, I can't remember what it was called, but
I'm trying to remember it as well. Yeah, while you were talking, it's gone.
there was a festival that cancelled 2 weeks earlier.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And as soon as that happened, people were like, Manifest, it's not going to happen, is it? And that just became a self-fulfilling prophecy. People stopped buying tickets completely, and that just ran it into the ground. So they got squeezed between rising costs, the need to come up with more liquidity, and that the non-increased ticket sales.
Yeah. Did you play Monolith Festival? That's because it was on about Con Doyle's Monolith in Cork. There was a Monolith Festival in May was announced with Overkill, My Dying Bride, Exorder, Dismember.
Sadly, no.
Right.
I would have loved to, obviously, especially as at least two of those bands are, let's call them bucket list bands for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
But no. The other thing about Manifest is that, and I think a lot of these other festivals, is that it doesn't just have a repercussion for the people who wanted to attend and the bands who were going to play. It has repercussions for people beyond the immediate blast radius, let's say. So specifically, because Exorder weren't going to get to play Manifest and weren't going to get that fee, they cancelled a bunch of dates in Europe, and there are a couple of dates I know of in Greece that were cancelled, where Cancer were due to play, that were cancelled because of the other cancellation. So it's incredibly frustrating when these things go that spectacularly wrong.
Yeah.
But hopefully we're beyond that to a large extent, and there still are people who continue to push through and provide an arena for the scene to live, right?
Yes.
For lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah. I mean, a personal highlight for you, I'd say, this year was supporting Left to Die in
100%.
March.
Yeah, we didn't just do one date, we did 2 dates.
Yeah.
And it was really satisfying to see that on the other side of the sea, the Irish Sea, you had the Zealot Cup lads, basically doing what we were doing over there, and they're real scene veterans. So to see them get that kind of opportunity to take that box basically and get to play with their heroes just as we did, is great, and it was fantastic to meet, like, especially Rick Ross,
Yeah.
like such a appreciative, low key, legend, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, to get to connect with these people and get on that sort of level where you have an exchange. Leprosy was the first really heavy thing that I listened to, and it blew my mind when I was 15. And so I've really been waiting to see that particular show since then. So to not only get to see it twice, but get to play with that band is beyond my expectations, at least as a 15-year-old. Now I'm a little bit more high in terms of my expectations, but yeah.
And how did you approach the actual gig itself? I mean, okay, like I'd imagine you're fairly reserved anyway, but I'm sure there was a party you wanted to fanboy spectacularly at some stage or other.
Well, it was we did get to kind of meet them and help provide a let's say local scene welcome or
Okay.
UK scene welcome to them. So to have that kind of exchange and get to talk about whatever guitar tunings or dive bombs and so on is great. But like as far as the show goes, as in the actual sequence of events, in a way you kind of have to approach it as you would any other show. It's just a case of making sure that everything works when you need it to, and there's so much focus that goes to that, and then you have to make sure the merch desk is set up and somebody's minding it and all that stuff, that you don't really have any time to think about, I don't know, fanboying or being nervous about anything. It's just like, is everything, is this on, right? Does he have his, can you hear that? And then lights are on and it's time to go.
And of course you're playing to probably maybe half of a crowd that mightn't have necessarily heard of you, so you're trying to win over new fans as well.
Again, I don't let that bother us, if you know what I mean. It's just, as I repeat a lot, every step of the way, every part of the process needs to be an end in itself, right? Whether we're driving to a show, whether we're having some food together, or as a band, or rehearsing, writing music, recording it, putting together an album that we're really happy with, creating the comic, or actually getting in front of people and playing a show. It's just another instance of getting together and making that noise that the those four musicians only can make, right? So in a way, it doesn't really matter who's watching us, right? Obviously, the energy of the audience is going to contribute to how the delivery comes across and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, in a way, it's irrelevant. But the thing is, while maybe some people hadn't heard of us or hadn't heard us before, it's going to be one of the easier crowds to win over. Rather than, I don't know, if we were to play with I don't know, Evergrey fans or something. It's probably not the best example, but there will be other crowds that are less well predisposed to our kind of racket.
Okay, so let's get on to the new release, World Turned Hell. Congratulations on it, man.
Thank you very much. One nugget of irritating information about it is that all the streaming service algorithms picked up the word hell and decided that it was filled with profanity, which it is not, because hell is a profane term for the North Americans.
Right.
So Spotify puts a little E to make sure that people know that they're going to hear explicit lyrics, which, by the way, we never have. There's never any
Yeah. Yeah.
swearing in our lyrics. But yeah,
Wow. That's an education there straight away. Bacon.
it's really irritating,
Yeah.
but it's fun.
Hmm. Um, let's talk about it. Two brilliant songs, another step in the right direction for the band, I would say. Like it's got all the elements of DAMIM, but again, sharp, shock, and again, intrinsic little changes here, there, and there. And your vocal performance actually on it, I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for taking the time to listening. For thanks for taking the time to listen to it. To anybody who has already done so. And as with all of our records, we essentially, I think it's fair to say that we take all the existing elements and kind of add to them
Hmm.
depending on how we're inclined at that point in time, right? There isn't really a formula. There isn't really this kind of method, and I don't think we're ever going to be in a situation where we go, well, how did we write that song? Let's see what makes that work and replicate it and write a riff that's kind of like this riff and layer things in this way because it's like that. It's more a case of you've written something and you come out to the other end and you have no idea how you did it, right? It's more a case of you have a certain number of ideas, you try and stick them together, see what works, and above all, throughout the whole process, trust your taste. Trust what you feel in your gut is good and bad, and what you feel in your gut is complete, right? So that's another thing, because we have some songs which are ostensibly complete, they just don't feel quite right. So we're not going to do anything with them until it gets to that point. But it's more a kind of, at the risk of sounding
A taster.
even more painfully pretentious than I already might have. It's a real, the process itself is a journey. It's just taking what you can come up with, sticking it together, and trusting your taste and hoping for the best.
But you've kept the key elements of your sound. And there's certain patterns that are definitely yours, you'd note. And I just concentrated more on your singing for those two songs. And I'm just wondering, is there maybe a feeling that over the last few, maybe even like I'm trying to figure out, the last recording was 2019, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So you've developed a vocal style, whether or not it's crafted through playing live now or something like that, but it's working, and it's working really well, especially for the new two songs. So I'm just intrigued in relation to, because they definitely obviously are a taster to what's coming down the line.
Well, we have another album that we're literally recording right now as we speak.
Okay.
The drum recordings are coming through. I'm sending them off to Faust for him to record the bass. Actually, that reminds me, I need to nag him about it. But it's ongoing, as I think you've identified. But in terms of the chancing upon a new kind of sound that's newer than the previous sounds that we've brought together, and particularly in terms of the vocal style. I mean, I've been shouting into a microphone in one way or another for 25 years, something like that. So your voice physiologically is going to evolve anyway, and there's when you get into that zone where you don't think about the specifics of the technique and you're just completely connected with what it is that you're putting across, and almost thought comes out of the equation, and you're just dependent on the chemistry of the band and how, you know, the sound system responds and the guitar sound, then that's when things will happen that are beyond your consciousness in a way. And I think that might be one of the things that you're alluding to or touching upon in terms of the vocal morphing. There's another thing, which is, I guess, some of the vocals are semi-clean, shall we say? They're more towards traditional singing, and I've always had a strong aversion to certain types of bands that put together different styles that are just the jar for me, right? I think maybe, you know, at the risk of injuring a few sacred cows, something like Slipknot, right? I could never get on with the way that he screams, and then all of a sudden it's this sort of completely different section with like this melodic major key tune, and he sort of sings along with it, and it just felt a bit awkward to me, right? So
yeah,
I feel that the way that we do things, it's a bit more integrated. It's a bit, it kind of, the bits dovetail in with each other, almost like they're one entirety of work rather than different sections, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But that's just my perspective and taste.
Okay, so I'm going to play World Turn Tell, and we'll talk about then your relationship with Neil Kernan afterwards, and we'll see where that brings us. Right, here we go. World Turn Tell of the EP. Fantastic, man. Really enjoyed it. Right, Neil, is he like, Eden says, he involved so much in it now that you really enjoy working with him?
Well, I would say that I've always enjoyed working with Neil from the get-go. One thing that should be obvious is that Neil is very much the real deal. They, you know, to wheel out all the cliches, they don't make them like that anymore. He started his audio career, I don't know if it's the 60s or the 70s, but we're talking at least early 70s.
Oh, that's like 50 years now, man.
Yeah. And he's worked with all sorts of styles, and all sorts of great artists like whether you're talking about Yes, David Bowie, Dokken, Judas Priest, Elton John, Hall and Oates, Nile,
Yeah.
Cannibal Corpse, Nevermore, Macabre. There's his CV is impressive, in even the word. So it's a real privilege to work with somebody of that caliber for a start, and then to he wouldn't to know that he wouldn't work with us if he didn't like our music, right? So
Correct.
to have that sort
Yeah.
of validation, not that I'm seeking it,
Mm.
but it's definitely welcome.
Mm.
And of course, when you're working with someone like that, they are a fount of anecdotes and tips and tricks, and you, not all our conversations revolve around audio or how to produce what we're going to do with this song, or what the preferred compression settings might be for this track. But which is another reason why it's so entertaining to work with him, because he does have all these other interests and so on. And he's generally quite an interesting guy.
Yeah.
He's one of the people who has plugins, as in new audio technology, sent out to him to be tested by the companies that make it. Right. So again, it's a real privilege to have that connection and that know-how poured into the cutting edge of what you're doing, really. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Hmm. Yeah. No, it's like I just was intrigued as well, approaching your vocal delivery. How much does Neil get involved in that?
Not at all.
Not at all.
The thing is that I've never actually met Neil in person.
What? Really?
Yeah. So for most of the time that he's worked with us, he lived in Chicago. Now he lives somewhere up in New York State, but I think. But yeah, we've always only interacted via internet communication or telephone.
Oh,
Um,
I thought he
but,
was one of those guys that spends half his time in London or England and half his time in America.
no,
Wow.
I'm afraid not. But but yes, so we've communicated extensively over
Hmm.
telephone and email and so on. And I would say that if we do go back to working with him for the next album, which I would like to do, he might have a bit more of a hand in terms of recommendations for the actual sound capture, right?
Okay.
The recording side of things, because there were certain things that he felt he needed to modify to um in terms of the sound, for example, the guitar sound and things like that. He wanted certain tweaks to be made. So for the next one, we're going to be able to work further to his specs
Okay.
in terms of the capture and that sort of stuff. But in no, the vocal performance is it's quite a sort of private thing. Like you can't really do it, or at least I can't, in terms of in front of an audience or anything like that. Even a recording engineer is borderline too much. It
Wow.
needs to be somewhere far away where I can blast the music and just focus on bringing the lyrics together and getting a sequence that makes sense. And also, I would add, if since you're showing some interest, vocals always need to be done with the guitar put away, right? You can't be playing and trying to put the vocals to the music because then that is one of the surest ways to come up with your most boring performance, because you're always going to instinctively tend to do it in time with your right hand, because your brain hasn't learned to disassociate.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do it separately, there'll be more room for things like syncopation and just different rhythms, different melodies that you would never have come up with otherwise. Yes. So actually that's a very important part of the process.
It's a good tip as well for younger bands that are listening in.
The downside of that, of course, is that it's easy to come up with vocal lines that are quite difficult to play to an intricate rhythm line, but at the same time, that means you're going to push yourself in terms of your technical ability and performance.
Okay. Talk to me about To Catch a Falling Knife. Maybe the title.
Goodness. I just felt that title, how shall I say, summed up something about the human condition in a way, right? So you're perpetually on the edge, hurtling through time and space, making a racket, as the case may be, and you're just this form rather than a collection of atoms. I would say it's fairly common parlance to refer to, life as a ever-shifting form, evolving through time and space, rather than, I am this matter. So I'm not articulating it very well, but there is something about that title which I felt captured some of the essence of the immediacy and almost empowering fragility of the human condition, shall we say? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the title itself conjures up another image of, obviously the knife is falling. You don't want to catch it, but your instincts will immediately.
Yes.
So there's that element, and then there's what you described. And I was just wondering as well, was there any influence with
what real life experience?
With actually some Asian movies, kung fu movies, or anything like that.
Interesting. Well, while I did watch literally every single kung fu film on Netflix during the lockdown, no, that didn't come into it at all. But I guess subconsciously, possibly. But no, it's more of experiences with large chef knives in my kitchen. Anything else.
Okay, we'll have a listen to it here. course, it should be noted as well that Nick makes his debut on
Yes.
this EP.
Mostly he participates in terms of the lead that he wrote for the title track of the EP, and which we're obviously really happy with. And it's something we'd flirted with. There are obviously a few leads in previous albums, etc., but it's never a main kind of part of the tracks. So to approach things in a way quite traditional way, to have that solo moment that's part of the song in that way, is in a sense a departure for us, and I can't think of anyone better to take that leap with us. Right, he's really phenomenal in terms of lead guitar work.
Yeah, it's nice to acknowledge it, man.
Well, he just is.
The two live tracks that are attached to the EP, in a language they understand and descendant of Amalek.
Yeah.
Where were they recorded?
Well, in a language they understand was recorded at actually Nick's first performance with us, I think.
Okay.
Which was Bloodstock, I think 2019. So they had this setup where they would be able to record every single track separately. So they gave you the multi-track of performance so you could get it mixed properly afterwards. And the multi-cam footage is fantastic.
Yeah.
So it was, we really had to do something with that. And plus that, that performance was good enough for recording, as in for release. And we'd never done any live content as part of a release before. So in a way, this EP, that being part of an EP, is a first.
Yeah.
And many bands, I would say, many bands do absolutely bring it when it comes to the live arena, but you do occasionally come across a band that records something and then doesn't really deliver it live in the same way. So in a way, that's almost an old school value, because you have all these bands that will play with a backing track. And I don't mean play with the backing track like Wasp, where they pretend that that's what they're doing. I mean, as part of the performance, it's explicit that there's backing track and that they're putting down their instruments for a bit so that they can sort of sing together or do a trade-off. And then later on, they pick up their guitar and their drum kit and then they go back to it.
Yeah.
And that's fine, because that's part of the thing. But no, I mean, we, in a sense, we're still purists, because we want to be able to do things, deliver them live first, and to be able to do something which stands in its own right, and is a representation of what we're doing on the record that does it justice, right? So that's actually a really important thing that's always been a common thread throughout all the time that we played. So to have an actual fixed sound embodiment representation of that and release it was in a way a step that it's strength that we'd never taken before, right? Then we had Descendant, which was, that's almost like a COVID track, because we had this thing, this virtual festival hosted by Metal
I remember
Injection,
watching it. Yes.
which was called Slay at Home. So we participated in one edition, and we did our recording live, but each separately in our studios. And then we mixed it together, and again, we liked the vibe, we liked the way it sounded. So that one track actually is mixed by someone other than Neil. It's the only track on the EP, but it's mixed by the same guy who recorded and mixed the Difference engine, which was our second album when we were called DAMIM. So so it was nice to bring him back in.
Yeah, nice throwback. Yeah.
Yeah. And he did it again justice, and has his kind of signature quite thick guitar sound added to it. So yeah, it really it just seemed like the right thing to do.
Yeah. And so this is out on Church Road Records, and it's available on cassette and CD.
That's correct.
So your relationship with Church Road Records?
Well, I've known Sammy especially, but Sammy and Justine for a long time, over a decade. So they're the main guys of Church Road Records, and if you aren't aware, they're the main driving force behind Employed to Serve.
Okay.
Right now, who are, I think they're still on the festival circuit at the moment. And one thing that I know that is particularly true with this label is that I have faith in their integrity, right?
Yeah.
So I know that whatever decision they're going to make, it comes from the right place, shall we say?
They have the best interests in the band at heart, like.
Well, no, it's not even the band. I mean, because it's a business, right? So if the situation arises that it's not a decision needs to be made in their interest that is disfavorable to any one of their bands, like, they're going to be fair about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, they're not going to lie to you, or they're not going to steal from you, or they're not going to do anything less than their best to promote what it is that you're working towards together. So actually, in the end, it's a joint enterprise.
Now, was Alan O'Neill involved with the artwork for the EP as well?
He certainly was. So
okay, fantastic job.
Alan, who I found out about because he worked with Conan as somebody who developed some of their artwork, some of their t-shirt work, specifically the pixel art, like the kind of old school 8-bit console game style thing. It's, it was excellent. That's what attracted me to his work in the first place. He did part of a t-shirt design that became part of the inlay of the previous album, and we were so happy with that we ended up working on the comic with him. But I also wanted him to do a cover, because that was one of the first things that drew me to his work. There was I can't remember what the band was called, but there's this sort of body in water, and there's like a ship in the distance, and it's a two-tone work, right? And it's just so striking, so well composed. I was like, I want something like that. And I also wanted something like that because I wanted it to work with merch and 2 screens, right?
Yes.
So that's always a consideration. Something striking that's reasonably simple to implement and to reproduce. And actually, by the time this goes out, we'll probably have made the t-shirts available as well. So yes.
What brief did you give him in relation to the design of the EP?
I spoke to him about the title track, and how it's basically about the experience of, shall we say, extreme bereavement that one can go through. And he came up with that. But the thing about I'd say the last 3 album covers, and this has been unintentional so far, is that they could be seen as all frames or pictures or portrayals of the same world.
Okay.
Right? The same, when I say the same world, the same sort of hellish dream world, right? Actually, if you look at the Difference engine and A Fine Game of Nil, that could just be a different vantage point from the point of view looking at the grave with all the debris in the background, right?
Yeah.
So I would invite anyone who's curious about this to revisit those and have a look at them and see how that's actually strangely, eerily true almost.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, that's really exciting now to have that merch range coming through. Now, collaborating with Alan on the comic book. Now, The Bloodied is, as I said to you in Limerick, it was absolutely brilliant piece of writing, and for someone who loves comics, if you can see it there.
I'm glad you finally got it.
Yeah, I was stressed over that actually. It's just beautifully put together. I recommend any fan of the genre to definitely check it out. It's up on your Bandcamp, www.dam.uk, and maybe just to read the back. Steeped in the lore and mystique of the murky, weather-beaten streets of London, The Bloody tells a tale of four misfit musicians as they summon occult powers through the ear-splitting roar of heavy metal to fight the otherworldly forces unleashed by a mysterious cabal. So enjoyable. Let's talk about the young Italian. When you were 12, 13, was comics a big part of your life then?
Yeah, around then. I mean, I come from I grew up in France and Belgium, so that has a strong comic culture.
That's it really, yeah.
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 And growing up with things like Asterix and
Okay.
Mobius and
Tintin and a few others.
Gaston Lagaffe, or like Gottlieb, who's a French artist who's no longer with us, but like there's a real, I'd say, deeply embedded cultural thing there, right? And especially something like the Incal by Mobius, which I think I came across when I was 7. And it's quite a dark sci-fi epic, right? Almost like esoteric epic with some, I don't know if it's sci-fi or supernatural elements, but it's quite, yeah, it was is a real mind blow moment at the time. And so that sort of thing really embeds itself in your evolving psyche. So I'd had the idea to put together a comic, but I don't think I would have. It had never really been a massive ambition of mine, but it's just I had this idea in the back of my mind for a decade or so, and then we were stuck and we couldn't go anywhere. And between, moments watching kung fu films on Netflix, in total existential dread, because you thought they might never let you out of your own house ever again. I and frustrated by the fact that we couldn't get together and make music. We can rehearse, could write stuff, but it's not the same, right? Yeah. So I figured, what else can we do to keep ourselves going? And creating a comic was one way, and ostensibly it would provide us with something useful that we could use to promote the band and whatnot afterwards. So we got together, we brought this scenario that I'd had to life, and Flo and I did the dialogues, and then Alan did the pages. I did some of the storyboarding, some of the sketching, so that we do this, that, but he took the lead on most of it, right? Let's not take away from his artistic acumen. But then we launched it at this Comic-Con, and it really sold. Because, as you may know, there's a fair overlap between metalheads and
Yeah.
comic nerds, right? And it really sold, and we sold records at the Comic-Con, and we made new fans. So we repeated that, and then when we brought it to shows, it would sell as well, because people were like, well, we're essentially the only band to do that.
Yeah.
I think I may be wrong, maybe I'm being a bit presumptuous, but since then I have come to know that Memoriam released a couple of comics themselves. So whether or not they've been inspired by us, I don't know. But I know that we did it before them, and I know we played some gigs together. By the way, this is in no way, shape, or form any kind of gatekeeping. If they want to do it, they contribute to that.
It's another
market.
It's another stream of income, and it's a brilliantly put together piece. But like, did you have to research much for, like, I mean, storytelling is an art form in itself. So like,
honestly, the first one, I'd had this arc in mind for a while anyway. It became challenging because there was this background, this backstory, this world that was mostly built in my head anyway. But it became challenging when it came to conveying key parts of that information in only 20 pages.
Yes.
In comic book format. And it's like, actually, when we put it together and I printed it and we read through it, it's like, actually, we're missing a bit of context here. So we had to create a new page to add some of that exposition, and then it made a lot more sense, right? And it flowed better.
Yeah. But
for the second one, which we're literally finishing up this week, literally right now, I'm talking to Alan, which I'm also very excited about. For this one, I've done a lot more in terms of researching story structure, storytelling, what's the midpoint, how to build the climax, all that kind of, in a way, planning how to intertwine it with a character arc, that sort of business. And bear in mind that this is chapter 2 in a 6 or 7 part edition arc, right? But if you liked issue 1 in any way, shape, or form, you're going to dig issue 2. We've taken everything to a new level. The artwork, the storytelling, the kind of the tension building, the world, the concepts that we bring into the world as well. Like, it's on the edge between sci-fi and gothic fantasy kind of thing. So there's some extra features that, if you like that sort of thing, you will appreciate.
Yeah, it is wonderful. And so it was printed by Formala Print.
Yeah, they're a printer out in somewhere in the Thames Valley. I can't remember exactly where, but they've always been really helpful and supportive. And there was this time where there were like a batch where there were 10, which weren't quite stapled together properly, so they sent us another 50 in the next one for free. So,
and Nightside Publishing is yourself then, is it?
Yes, that's us. Okay. So
I like it. I like the inside of it as well, so you can put in some advertisements for bands.
Well, yes, I mean that was a no-brainer, because we were with Apocalyptic at the time, which we're obviously still on good terms with, and to give them a little bit of free extra boost was kind of nice. And there are hundreds of people now that would never have heard of these bands.
Yeah, exactly.
That now have. So
yeah, it's great.
But
congratulations on it, man.
Thank you. Just wanted to add, in terms of the publishing, originally we really weren't sure what we were going to do with it. Whether it was going to be a booklet we were just going to give away or add as something, but our ideal scenario was to find a publisher who's going to do all the legwork for us. And it became apparent that nobody was going to pick you up it's very much like a music industry situation, right? And if you've got a profile and a fan base and people who buy your stuff, then you start to get interest of people who want to make money off you, as it were. And right now, I think we're perfectly happy going it alone. Although we have had interest from publishers at this point.
Wow.
So,
interesting. Let's keep watching this page, as they say, to see where it goes. But like, it's such a professional product anyway. Just, I mean, it, like, if that's at a merch stand, you're straight away, the metal fan will be over there looking at it. And how much was it again?
£7 we charge.
£7.
Yeah.
Come on, fantastic value as well. So yeah, so issue 2 will be out hopefully before 2023.
Oh, we're launching it at the next Comic-Con, unless something goes horribly wrong.
Oh wow, isn't that great, man? So the
yeah.
Comic-Cons are probably in a lot of the main UK cities.
Well, so far we've only done Comic-Cons in London and Bristol.
Okay.
And I want to expand our reach. And yeah, just doing the London ones is a fair amount of work, but it enables us to get it out there, and it gives us certain pace to what we're doing. So instead of waiting on bands or the opportunity to gig or whatever, you can just book another table and get in front of people, and then have a real exchange, engage with potential fans or people who are enthusiastic about music or comics, etc. And then that really comes from there.
Brilliant. So to wrap it up, let's talk about what you have coming down the line gig wise. I think the first one is the Talminator Metal Fest. Nate,
Yes.
I was looking at the lineup, some nice bands there: Sodom, Dying Fetus, Holy Moses, Insanity Alert, Tres the Horde, BS. Pick out a few of my favorites.
There's also an Elnathrak earlier in the week, and I can't remember what the full lineup is, but every day has some really, really solid bands. And you know that the underground stage will be excellent as well. So I think it's fair to say that it's the new Metal Days, because it's on the site where Metal Days used to be when it was content to be a sort of small medium festival.
Okay.
So I would highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in any kind of festival experience, because it won't be like any other festival. It'll be its own thing. It'll be out in nature rather than penned in a campsite. We're very excited about it.
Excellent. So then your next date then is the 2nd of August in the Dome. What's that like as a venue?
Well, it's been upgraded a few times since I started going there, and the sound system is much better than it used to be, and it's as is the lighting, and it's one of the better kind of
capacity wise,
small to medium venues. Capacity, it's like, I don't know, it's 600-700, something like that.
Okay, and that's with Bill-Acre, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
And we're looking forward. This is their only date in the UK in festival season. They're basically coming over because there are no festivals in the UK. They're going to play one date, and then they're going to do a bunch of fests in Europe. They are an Australian band, and if you haven't checked them out, I would recommend it.
What are they, death metal or
sort of? The term that's used is melodic death, but I think that's really misleading, because melodic death, to me, conjures up things like In Flames, etc., and that's really not what they're about. I think the term melodic is, I was actually talking to a friend about this yesterday, is massively overused and misused, right? Because melody is just a recognizable, identifiable sequence of notes, right? You can have a chromatic melody, I suppose, but yeah, that's not what melodic means. Melodic means, in this context, major scale sounding, and there are a lot more oblique in their approach to music, right? It's not just kind of nasty or cheesy or whatever.
Yeah.
There's interesting chordal and modal progressions which make it worthwhile in terms of at least giving it a listen.
Definitely will do. So now the next one up is September in Ireland. You're back over to us with Zealot, Cult and Cancer.
Can't wait.
Yeah, 30th of September. Let's check that. Am I around or what? Dublin is so expensive.
It is.
Yeah. And I'm off. It's a Saturday night. That's perfect. Excellent stuff. I'll probably see you there. And the last one then, Nathaniel, is Brighton in December, unless now there's other stuff that you can't announce yet.
We're always looking to secure more shows.
Yes.
And yes, there is stuff in the pipeline, but
at the moment that's the only ones we're allowed.
At the moment, those 4 dates are the only ones in the calendar.
Yeah.
Plus, we've got the album to get on with. So
true. Okay, so that's it, my friend. Thank you for coming on the show again. Pleasure talking to you as always.
Thank you very much for having us on. And it's great to speak to you as always.
Yeah, so check out World Turntail. It came out on the 2nd of June on Church Road Records on cassette and CD. And it's a lovely taster of what's to come, in my opinion. And also get on their Bandcamp page and buy The Bloodied. Talked about this. It's fantastic. It's a really nice thing to have to your collection and unusual as well. So congratulations on that. So say hello to Flo, Nick and Faust for me as well.
Certainly will.
Yeah, and like I always end the show, support your local metal scene.